We've looked at some Dolphins free agent targets in the past, but on today's show, I want to take a look at 5 offensive free agent targets that, in my opinion, will fit the Miami Dolphins roster in 2026. Because with Bobby Slowik as offensive coordinator, there is going to be a different offensive scheme than what we've had in the last 4 years with Mike McDaniel, which means there's free agents that are going to fit Miami better than they would have in the past. And I'm looking at 5 players that could fit perfectly. But we always got to mention the cap space before we move forward. And I wanted to use this graphic to allude to you that there is no exact number for Miami. We've mentioned multiple times on Over the Cap, it's at negative 30.2. But I also want to showcase that on Spot Track, it's negative 22.8, and Pro Football Focus, in their own measuring, has it at negative $24.4 million. So unclear on where Miami actually stands in terms of its cap space. It's not the worst in the NFL. It's not great to be in the negatives, but there are about 4 or 5 teams that actually have less cap space in the projections than Miami. So the Dolphins will be able to create cap space by making different roster moves, but it likely will not be more than $35-40 million like it was last season in free agency. And before we get to the free agent targets, well, let's talk about Bobby Slowik's offense in a brief manner here, because he comes from the Shanahan system. He learned under Kyle Shanahan, and when you look at what he did in Houston, it was very similar to what Shanahan does in San Francisco. It's about a 59-40 run, pass-run split, so definitely in the top half in the NFL in terms of passing rate. And with the Shanahan system, you should expect a lot of versatile multiple looks. You should expect tight end usage. You should expect under center runs, under center play action a ton. I mean, you look at the play action rate in Houston in 2023 and 2024 when Slowik was calling plays, it was about the same, 25.1% in 2023, 26.4% in 2024. There were some issues with that Texans offense in Slowik's final year, which was 2024, but there was a lot of issues with that roster. Bad offensive line play. C.J. Stroud started to fall off a cliff. The run game was not effective whatsoever. So there are a lot of things to take away from Slowik's 2 years as a play caller in Houston that are negative, but there's also a lot to take away that is positive. I like the continuity that he'll bring, and I like the new, more under center, physical, run-based offensive scheme that Miami will try to employ. We'll see if it works out. And when the Dolphins are in free agency, they make a signing, we will make a video. Turn on those notifications. We are about 100 away from 11K people having your noties turned on. Be one of the 11,000 because we are dropping daily content. The first free agent target I want to talk about, these aren't ranked by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just doing 5 names that I really like for Miami, and one of them is wide receiver Kendrick Bourne. It's a familiar name. He played with San Francisco, went to New England for a couple of years, played really well for the Patriots, and then at the end of his tenure there, went back to the 49ers. And you look at his past 2 seasons, and it's nothing special. Certainly this year was more productive than the year prior, but he also got more snaps in a brief manner. He played really well early on in 2025 with Ricky Pearsall out, George Kittle dealing with injury, when Mac Jones was starting because Brock Purdy had to miss 8 games. Well, that's where Kendrick Bourne got most of his production. He's played for Kyle Shanahan most of his career. We've seen him be productive in an 800-yard receiver a couple years ago with the New England Patriots. Like, the only knock that I have on Kendrick Bourne really for Miami is a high drop percentage. You look at wide receivers that got at least 50 targets this season in the NFL, Bourne's drop percentage was the highest at 15.7%. So that's definitely a little knock on the wide receiver. But why I'm in on Kendrick Bourne? Because he's going to be cheap. He's 30 years old, but he has a lot left in the tank, in my opinion. Would be a very solid addition to this wide receiver room as a wide receiver 3 or a wide receiver 2, probably more in the wide receiver 3 end. He knows the system that Bobby Slowik is going to try to run, and he is an all-time locker room guy. I really mean that. His vibes are always up. His energy is always high. He's a good mentor. He's a good leader for younger wide receivers and will bring good morale to that locker room, which I think matters, especially for a team that is projected to be in the bottom of the AFC standings and picking top 10 next year. Kendrick Bourne, if you're looking for a receiver to add in free agency, is my number one guy. Justin Skule is number 2 on the people we're talking about today. He is an offensive lineman that has played for Minnesota, San Francisco, and Tampa. And you look at his career in the NFL, once again, has ties to the Shanahan system, playing in San Francisco for Shanahan in 2 years. Was with Tampa Bay, played for Dave Canales, played for Liam Cohen. 3 years. That is high-level offensive coordinators that run very similar systems to what Bobby Slowik is going to attempt to run in Miami in 2026. And then obviously with Minnesota this past year in 2025, Kevin O'Connell. Do I have to say it? All of these offensive names that we're talking about in terms of play callers and coaching all derive from the same type of system that was started from Shanahan. It's why it's called the Shanahan styled offense, Shanahan tree, whatever you want to say it. But Skule, in very limited sample size, has been solid at offensive tackle. In Tampa, 360 snaps, right out in the high 60s and everything. 2025, filling in for a lot of injured offensive linemen in Minnesota, low 60s, mid 60s. Like, sure, he's allowed some sacks, but he plays well in the run game, and he knows the system. Plus, his versatility is very intriguing to me. He could play left tackle or right tackle. This could be a depth swing tackle signing for Miami to back up Patrick Paul and back up Austin Jackson since he gets injured so much. It could be a one-year starter at right tackle if you ultimately choose to cut or trade Austin Jackson this offseason. I labeled Skule as a trade target for Miami actually in August. If you go back to our training camp content, I would like to take another run at him. I think he is a solid, good NFL offensive tackle. The only Dolphin free agent that we are going to talk about today is Greg Dulcich. He does make my top 5 list, though. I believe that Miami needs to bring him back because of the flashes he showed this year in the back half of the season for Miami, but he also is someone who would fit this system really well, in my opinion. Slowik knows his strengths, knows his weaknesses, and when you think about what is important to this Shanahan-styled offense, it's the tight end play. George Kittle has made a living working with Kyle Shanahan. I'm not saying Greg Dulcich would get to that level, but he would be pretty productive for Miami, and we'll talk more about it here in a second. But today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks. The big game is set in just a week and a half. New England and Seattle are going to square off to decide the football championship. And if you want to get in on the last football game until August, I know, very, very sad, Prize Picks lets you do that. And you get $50 in lineups when you play your first $5 right now. Injury reboots, which means if one of your players gets hurt and leaves the game in the first half but doesn't return in the second half, you will not lose that lineup. You will actually get, guess what? Him removed from your lineup, and then the rest of your players move on. I've already got my lineup in for the big game. More on Drake May passing touchdowns. It's the first time in a while New England is going to play in non-freezing, snowy, wintry, rainy conditions. I think that offense is going to look much better for them. That's why I'm going more on Stephon Diggs receptions, and I'm going more on Drake May passing touchdowns. But I'm also going more on Rashid Shaheed longest reception, 16.5. The Patriots play a ton of man coverage. Shaheed is the fastest wide receiver potentially in football. So to me, I think that's a very good option there for Shaheed. Join me, pick more or less on Prize Picks. Download the app. Use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups when you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups when you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. It's good to be right. Let's get back to talking about Greg Dulcich because I don't think he's going to be expensive in free agency. Like, you might be able to re-sign him 1 year, $3 million once again. Hey, I would even think about giving him a 2-year, $8 million contract if you wanted to, with maybe backloading some of it in 2027 when you're projected to have a lot more cap space. Like, Bobby Slowik knows Greg Dulcich. He is going to be able to acclimate him to the new styled system. I think we saw Dulcich has a innate ability to make things happen after the catch. He was a better blocker for Miami than I anticipated. I think Greg Dulcich is a big winner in the Bobby Slowik promotion or hiring, if you want to call it, because he has a much larger chance of returning to the 305. I would bring back Greg Dulcich. What say you? Should Miami re-sign the tight end? Type Y for yes or type N for no. Get those thoughts in the comments. Number 4 player we're talking about today. We're going back to the trenches. Offensive lineman Spencer Burford, who is a very fascinating player, if you ask me. He was a former 4th-round pick in 2022 out of UTSA, and he spent the last 4 seasons with the San Francisco 49ers. Now, he, in his early career, was a starter for San Francisco, but he basically got benched / replaced in the final couple of years because he wasn't as good as Shanahan in San Francisco hoped him to be. But he's got a little bit of versatility. Now, he's mostly played at left guard right guard specifically, but could be a cheap, nice backup option for Miami, for James Daniels, who could be cut, or you don't know if you could trust him to stay healthy because you signed him and he played 4 snaps for you in 2025. Like, Spencer Burford is definitely not the best O-lineman in the world. I'm not going to try to act like he would immediately help Miami and maybe even be a starter, but could be a really high-level backup and depth piece with Miami looking to find new guys because Daniel Brunskill's a free agent. Cole Strange isn't sure. Maybe you can make those guys return and fill those roles as backup interior offensive linemen. But if they want to go somewhere else, or if Bobby Slowik wants to go somewhere else, Spencer Burford knows the type of system he wants to run and is a very intriguing option. Probably the most fascinating name to me on the entire list is John Metchie, the wide receiver, former Alabama wide receiver, former Texans, and then with the New York Jets. And that's why I'm bringing him up on today's show. He was drafted in 2023 by the Houston Texans. And even if you want to say Slowik didn't have a large role in selecting the wide receivers, the offensive players in those drafts, you know that they checked with him if he's a guy that can fit and excel in his system. And Slowik obviously signed off for him and coached him for 2 years, even when he wasn't playing and battling his illness. And that is why, to me, he's a fascinating young guy to go after. And I feel like I've said fascinating a lot today. I apologize. But he's played 1,200 snaps. Not a lot, right? You look at like high-level wide receivers, this is basically a year and a half of work. And this is obviously his 3rd year in the league, 23, 24, and 25. So he's missed about a year and a half, if you will. He got a larger opportunity for the Jets in the back half of the season, but I can't blame him for not putting up big-time production because he's working with Brady Cook in the worst team in the NFL this year. Like, I know the Raiders ended up with the number 1 pick. I don't really think it's a question. The Jets were the worst team in football this year. They ended up with the number 2 overall pick. Now, what complicates it a little bit is that Metchie is a restricted free agent. So there's a chance that the Jets tender him and don't really allow him to leave their building. But if he is on the open market and the Dolphins are interested in signing him for a cheap price point, because I don't think he would get a lot of money, he's a guy that knows Slowik's system. Slowik knows Metchie. It could be a good young player to go after because he's only 25 years old with a lot of upside potentially. We'll see, though. That's a name that I really want Dolphins fans to monitor, and we'll have you covered every step of the way between now and free agency beginning in March. It's sneaky only 5 weeks away, so stay locked in because these rumors are going to ramp up as we get closer to that free agent period. Subscribe today.